You ever have that feeling where you're surrounded by people, yet somehow, you still feel completely alone? That was Lena's life. 19 years old, stuck in a house that never truly felt like home. Her parents were too wrapped up in their own world to notice. And then there was Ryan, her stepbrother. 17, sharp-minded, and the only person who ever seemed to really see her. It started on a rainy night. Lena sat by the window, watching the storm outside, feeling like the chaos out there mirrored what was inside her. Her phone buzzed. "Ryan, you good?" Just 2 words, but they felt like an anchor. She hesitated, then typed back, "Yeah. Just thinking." A few minutes later, footsteps. She didn't even have to look. She already knew. Ryan leaned against her doorframe, arms crossed, that usual half-smirk on his face. "What now?" Lena sighed. "Just nothing." "That's a lie." She hugged her knees, staring at the floor. "I don't know. It's weird lately. Like I don't belong here." Ryan walked in, sat on the edge of her bed. "Yeah. I get that." She looked at him, surprised. "You do?" "Of course. They got married, threw us in a house together, and expected us to play pretend. Meanwhile, they're off doing their own thing. Like we're some side characters in their perfect little story." That hit her harder than she expected. He had said it out loud, the thing she'd been feeling but never voiced. "Maybe that's why it doesn't feel real," she murmured. Ryan leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. "You ever think about what life would have been like if they never met?" She glanced at him. "Yeah. All the time." He tapped his fingers against his knee. "Would we still have met?" Lena smiled faintly. "Maybe. In different circumstances." Their eyes met then, and for a second, the air in the room shifted. The rain kept pouring outside, but inside, everything was still. Lena's pulse quickened, and she didn't even know why. Ryan looked away first, standing up. "You should get some sleep." Lena nodded, watching him walk to the door. He hesitated, like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. He just left. And yet, even after he was gone, Lena's heart was still racing. She tried to ignore it. The way Ryan's words lingered in her mind, the way her heart reacted to his presence. It was ridiculous. She kept telling herself that. But the more she tried to push it away, the more it stayed. Days passed, and things felt different. Not in an obvious way, but in the small moments. The way his eyes lingered a little longer when they spoke. The way her stomach flipped when he stood too close. It was nothing. Just her overthinking. Or at least, that's what she told herself. One evening, their parents were hosting a dinner party downstairs. Laughter, clinking glasses, meaningless conversations filled the house. Lena had no interest in any of it. She slipped away to the quiet of her room, hoping for solitude. But minutes later, Ryan was there, leaning against the doorframe like always. "Skipping the fun?" he asked. She rolled her eyes. "Since when is listening to Dad's work stories fun?" Ryan smirked. "Good point." He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. Something about the way he did it sent a ripple through her. He sat on the floor, stretching out, looking completely at ease. "So, you're just gonna hide out all night?" Lena shrugged. "Not much else to do." He studied her, something unreadable in his expression. "You've been weird lately." Her breath caught. "Weird how?" "I don't know. You're just different." She swallowed. "Maybe I'm just thinking too much." Ryan nodded slowly, like he understood something she wasn't saying. Silence settled between them, thick and unspoken. Then he reached for the book on her nightstand, flipping through it absentmin. Lena avoided Ryan for days. It was easier that way, pretending nothing had changed. But she felt it everywhere, in the silence between them, in the way her heart reacted when he entered a room. It wasn't supposed to be like this. She threw herself into distractions, spending more time with friends, even agreeing to go on a date with Jake, a guy from her college. He was nice, easy to talk to, exactly the kind of person she should be with. But as they sat in the cafe, laughing over something trivial, all she could think about was Ryan. Later that night, she came home to find him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. He glanced at her, Then at the time. Late night. She nodded, setting her keys down. Went out with Jake. Ryan's jaw tightened, but he just gave a small nod. Cool. She hesitated. It was nice. He scoffed, pushing away from the counter. Yeah, sure. Something snapped in her. What's your problem? Ryan turned, eyes sharp. Nothing. Don't do that, she said, stepping closer. You've been acting weird ever since. She stopped herself, pulse racing. Ryan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Forget it, Lena. No, she pressed. Say it. His eyes locked onto hers, unreadable. You really wanna hear it? She nodded, heart pounding. Ryan stepped closer, the space between them shrinking. Fine. I don't like it. I don't like seeing you with him. I don't like that you can just go out and pretend like none of this is happening. Lena's breath hitched. None of what? He shook his head, jaw clenched. You know what? Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Lena forced herself to look away. This is wrong. Ryan let out a bitter laugh. Yeah. I know. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then footsteps in the hallway. Their mother's voice calling from the other room. The moment shattered. Ryan stepped back first. Go to bed, Lena. His voice was quieter now, resigned. She didn't argue. She just turned and walked away, even though every part of her wanted to stay. She didn't sleep that night. She stared at the ceiling, heart racing, thoughts tangled. She had spent weeks denying it, pushing it away, but now it was there, undeniable, unspoken but real. And the worst part? She had no idea what to do with it. The next morning, Ryan was already at the table, scrolling through his phone, acting like nothing had happened. She hesitated in the doorway, waiting for him to look up. He didn't. She sat across from him, searching for the right words. Ryan. Don't, he said, not looking at her. Her chest tightened. We can't just pretend. That's exactly what we have to do. His voice was firm, but his hands clenched the phone a little too tightly. Lena exhaled shakily. So that's it. We just forget. Ryan finally looked at her, and for the first time, she saw it, how hard he was fighting it, too. But then he nodded. Yeah. Something inside her cracked, but she forced herself to nod. Okay. Days passed. Then weeks. The distance between them grew, and they let it. It was easier that way. Lena focused on school, on her friends, on anything that wasn't him. Ryan did the same. They spoke only when necessary, kept their interactions short, polite, careful. Then one evening, as she packed for college, she heard a knock at her door. She turned to find Ryan standing there, hands in his pockets, looking unsure for the first time. You're really leaving, he said. She nodded. Yeah. A long pause. Then, softer, that's good. She swallowed. Yeah. Ryan glanced around her half-empty room, then back at her. Guess this makes things easier. Lena forced a smile. Guess so. They stood there, neither moving, neither saying what they really wanted to. Then Ryan gave a small nod. Take care, Lena. She nodded back. You too. He turned to leave, and something inside her screamed that this wasn't how it was supposed to end. Ryan. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it stopped him in his tracks. He stood there for a moment, back still to her, shoulders tense. Then slowly, he turned. Their eyes met, and in that instant, every unspoken word, every buried feeling, came rushing to the surface. This doesn't just go away, she said, voice shaking. We can't just erase it like it meant nothing. Ryan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. I know. His voice was rough, strained. But what choice do we have, Lena? What are we supposed to do? She didn't have an answer. All she knew was that walking away from this felt just as impossible as holding on to it. Ryan took a step closer, then stopped himself, fists clenched at his sides. If things were different, his voice broke off, and for the first time, she saw it, the heartbreak, the war raging inside him. Lena swallowed the lump in her throat. But they're not. Ryan gave a sad smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. No. They're not. A heavy silence stretched between them, filled with everything they couldn't say. Then, after what felt like forever, Ryan took a breath and forced himself to step back. "Goodbye, Lena." She nodded, blinking back tears. "Goodbye, Ryan." And this time, when he walked away, she let him.